New second thought video on 1/6 and the rise of fascism in the U.S. Oh, this is a good one. This is going to be a good one. I have to pee really bad.
Everything Trump supporters had said they would be doing for months. Did it exactly the way they'd been planning and telling all their friends they'd be doing it in online forums. Did the whole thing while on.com/second thought. Remember January 6th?
I'm going to pee. I'll be back.
Remember, it was the day Antifa did everything Trump supporters had said they would be doing for months. Did it exactly the way they'd been planning and telling all their friends they'd be doing it in online forums. Did the whole thing while wearing MAGA shirts, waving Confederate flags, and having the names and faces of long-standing Republican voters grafted onto their own, Mission Impossible style. And then Antifa chivalrously took none of the credit for it. Wow, what a memorable time in American history that was. It's been almost a year, or exactly 1 year, or just a little more than 1 year. I don't know. I'm writing this in December. Let's just say it's been about a year since the weirdest day in recent American history, and in the meantime, things haven't been super fun. The far right seems like it's continuing to grow in power and in influence under the Biden admin. And in this episode, we're going to be looking at that a little more closely, because it is a troubling omen for the future of politics in this country. Let's get started. The first thing I should address is the title of the video. The idea that fascism is on the rise in the US. That's a pretty obvious statement for most people, and likely even more so for the audience I have on this channel. Fascism has been on the rise for a while, so much so that it's made that very statement the topic of countless op-eds, and not too long ago, the most powerful government seat in the world was filled by the unwitting culmination of that trend. For 4 years, the United States was ruled by a man who repeatedly parroted fascist narratives, cozied up to white supremacist organizations, and used armed forces and a militarized police to quash anti-fascist protest movements. And those are just some of the many other telltale signs of fascism. There are just so many. I'm not going to spend more time on this already tired argument of whether—
No, brother, the real fascism is... No! The real fascism is not when the government does things. The real fascism is when that same FBI was like, it's bad that you broke into the Capitol and beat the shit out of cops. That's the real fascism. Or fascism is when you teach CRT to children.
Trump is a fascist, a proto-fascist, a neo-fascist, or not a fascist at all, haha, don't worry about it, because you've had over 4 years of that and we're all sick of it. This video is about how the US as a whole is getting fascister. Even more fascisty? How America is doing big fash. But just so it's out of the way, I'm going to be using the same definition of fascism I've used before, palingenetic ultranationalism. Palingenetic meaning a belief in and a desire for the violent rebirth of a nation to overcome a period of moral decay, and ultranationalism meaning an overwhelming loyalty to a perverted vision of one's country, often laced with bigotry and racism. There is more to fascism than that, and it varies by the culture in which it appears, but since we're talking about big trends in our common discourse, defining fascism by its core ideology like this is actually pretty useful. So, with all that in mind, let's go back to January 6th. That day was a real turning point for the American far right, particularly in the months that followed it. On the one hand, it was the first time in several years that crackdowns had targeted white nationalists and their friends so aggressively. As I'm writing this, over 700 people have been arrested and charged for the acts committed on the day of the riots, and several trials.
They went so fucking far that an American government that is incredibly fucking racist, incredibly white supremacist, and has like routinely behaved in a matter that is consistent to those values, were like, dude, you can't do that. And the proof is in the fucking pudding that they themselves also were operating under the mindset that like, no, you can do that. America is as racist as we are, and these institutions are as racist as we are, because they filmed the whole process. So I don't know why people still have like confusion about this issue, about January 6th. I don't know how you can look at something that is so obvious, so in front of your eyes, something that was so well televised, okay, by the fucking people doing the crimes themselves, that there's still misinformation that is able to spread.
Trials are ongoing to identify central figures and prosecute them. Groups like the Proud Boys, who were involved in the event and reached superstar status in 2020 after this infamous clip.
stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what, somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right.
These groups started to lose members in 2021. Whether it was because of mass deplatforming from Parler and other,
or because the fucking main guy that wasn't the white supremacist guy, or was like, you know, the main guy became this. There was an internal conflict between the Proud Boys. You had Enrique Tarrio, who is Cuban, he's brown, okay? And then you had like the Tiny Toes guys and like all these other fucking white supremacist dudes, even if they themselves weren't white, that were literally like internally conflicting about like how racist you can be, okay? Or how white supremacist they should be openly. And basically, Enrique Tarrio, who we now know was, you know, we literally know it was cooperating with the FBI, okay? Who suspiciously was pulled out one day before the insurrection. You know, that when that came out, it was, you know, it was GG's for that organization.
Online cesspools for the far right, or because the group splintered after leader Enrique Tarrio was outed as an FBI informant. The Proud Boys and groups like them could not and did not build the same sized audience on Telegram as they had achieved just a year earlier on.
Where is Enrique Tarrio? I would love to know. I would just love to know what's up with Enrique Tarrio, the Mr. I'm not racist, I can't be racist, I'm Cuban and brown Andy. So strange, dude.
Their platforms. But that seemingly downward trend is a very small part of the story. Not only have public shows of force by the far right increased, not only do already white supremacist police forces get infiltrated by even more extreme.
So is that different than the CIA doing the terrorism provoking stuff you were talking about earlier? No. Because the difference between like going after a group of fucking individuals who are like very clearly mentally ill, okay, and agitating them to do like acts of terror is entirely different than an already existing cell that's like a paramilitary cell that is willing and able to do the terrorist shit, okay? But then overtaking it with a CIA informant and basically doing fucking like PR for them as that CIA informant. It's not what I'm saying is without Enrique Tarrio, the Proud Boys would still do the Proud Boy shit, and they were doing the Proud Boy shit. But without an FBI person literally agitating and also offering supplies and methods of doing terrorism, Governor Gretchen Whitmer kidnappers would not have gotten to that point at all. It's the level of involvement that and the degree of coercion that makes something prosecutable versus not. Does that make sense?
Extremist group members, the overall trajectory of the far-right movement in the US in general has been growth. Massive growth. And the reason the far-right has grown so much is because it has successfully coalesced under a few key narratives that it has been able to mainstream in greater American political culture. The Proud Boys may not be what they used to, but it's because the American right as a whole has taken their place. Take a look at this clip, taken from a community meeting in Shasta County, California.
And you better be happy that we're good citizens, that we're peaceful citizens. But it's not going to be peaceful much longer, okay? And this isn't a threat. I'm not a criminal. I've never been a criminal. But I'm telling you that good citizens are going to turn into real concerned and revolutionary citizens real soon. And nobody else is going to say that.
This is why I always say, like, accelerationism in America is so fucking idiotic. Because, like, if you are an accelerationist, if you, like, legitimately think that there's going to be, like, a fucking Marxist revolution or something, you're out of your fucking mind. The only thing we're accelerating towards is fascism, and more fascism will happen. Okay? Think about that. What kind of fucking leftist labor militancy exists? What kind of fucking organizing exists on the left to the same degree as, like, even the fucking Proud Boys? Recognize that the reason why these people can organize in this capacity, by the way, is because they are just doing America, but a little bit harder, okay? Because the attitudes that they have, the things that they're advocating for, those are seen as like patriotic American values. You know what I mean? They're just doing it a little bit harder. And therefore, all the cops or all the institutions are not going to turn around and be like, whoa, 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 hold on. You're doing too much America, brother. We need to stop that. But when you organize against capitalism, when you organize against white supremacy, well, then you're actually a threat. And then you get fucking murdered. Fred Hampton comes to mind immediately. Murdered in your fucking sleep. Okay? MLK, Malcolm X.
I love this community has flex has high.
I'm the only person that has the balls to say what I'm saying right now. That we're building, we're organizing, and we'll work with law enforcement or without law enforcement. But you won't stop us when time comes because our families are starving. And if you don't hear the seriousness of my voice, I hope you open your ears and you absolutely listen to what I'm saying. Because this is a warning for what's coming. It's not going to be peaceful much longer. It's not going to be rah-rah. It's not going to be speeches. It's not going to be gathered outside saying a Pledge of Allegiance. It's not going to be waving flags. It's going to be real. When you've seen the things that I've seen, I went to war for this country.
The fuck did you see, dumbass?
I've seen the ugliest, dirtiest part of humanity. I've been in combat, and I never want to go back again. But I'm telling you what, I will to save this country. If it has to be against our own citizens, it will happen. And there's a million people like me, and you won't stop it.
He's like, yeah. It's always funny when you think about like what has agitated this guy to behave this way, and it's always something like they're teaching that slavery is morally abhorrent in schools. You know what I mean? Or that like he has to wear a mask in Orange County for the 30-second duration as his fucking dumbass is walking from the host server table to his actual fucking table. Like it's like, I'm ready to do it again, brother. I've killed and I will do it again. It's like, dude, are you fucking insane? I mean, yes, you are insane. You are literally insane. Okay? Somebody called me racist after I, was being racist. How is this not illegal? The dude is openly threatening insurrection in a sane society. He'd be jailed for this threat. What makes you think America is a sane society? Also, secondly, like, I'm not even in favor of fucking jailing this dude, okay? That's not going to do well, okay? That's not going to help that guy.
Open the county. Let our citizens do what they need to do. Let owners of businesses do what they need to do to feed their families.
Bro, oh my God, he's literally talking about jalapeno poppers. Oh, fuck me. Oh my God. He's literally saying like, I'm about to catch a charge if you don't let me go to Applebee's, dude. Oh my Lord. Oh my God.
Families, take the masks off.
That's a pretty troubling discourse, and as tempting as it might be to see this as a brief insight into a small movement, there's good evidence that the man in the video is just the most vocal part of the new American right. There's good evidence these beliefs aren't limited to militias with goofy names. They're an integral part of the conservative mob. Just take this statistic from the GWU Program on Extremism. Only around 13% of those charged in the Capitol riots were formal members of militant groups like the Proud Boys, the 3%ers, and the Oath Keepers. The remaining 87% were a mix of typical Trump supporters and independent far-right extremists, there with their friends and family or lone attendees defined as inspired believers.
Dude, I don't know. I feel like my method of dealing with this is not just by like, again, shutting down Facebook is like simply is simply like fucking banning a method that these people communicate through. It can be effective in the short term, but the real problem is like, you got to give Republicans a fucking thing that they actually have to be reactionary against. Okay. I hate to always go back to the liberals and their fucking fault and their overall failure in the situation. And yes, I do think that a little bit more authoritarianism, I guess, or not authoritarianism, but like a more utilitarian approach that where the government actually does do things that most of these fucking dickheads would consider to be authoritarian, but it's not actually authoritarian, it's commonplace in every other country, is understandable. Okay? But ultimately, like, if Democrats aren't fighting for anything, okay, and then you create a situation where the Republicans have to make their own issues, okay? If you actually were fighting for something, at least Republicans would have to fight against that because, like, God forbid, you know, you give workers better wages and shit, right? So they would have to fight against that. And, you know, if you're fighting against that, you're not going to fucking lose your mind over elections being stolen for Donald Trump.
Hogwatch.
Do you think there's any way to stop the growth of fascism and far-right extremism apart from, like, World War II fascism scare? Huh. Anyway, deplatforming does work, though. I mean, I think that it's like the government should absolutely punish every single one of these fucking major platforms that don't actually have like a legitimate terms of service, where all these fucking ideas like manifest. I know it's like, gonna hurt me as well ultimately, but like I'll take the fucking L. You know, I'll get banned for saying the C word if that means that, like, you know, the rest of the fucking platform doesn't get to spread vaccine misinformation and shit like that.
The gram pacer test is a multi-state.
Wait, did you say that deplatforming does not work? No, I do believe deplatforming works for sure.
The 20-meter pacer test will begin in 30 seconds.
Means most people who breached the Capitol were just average Republicans. And you can tell, these rioters just don't look like the typical far-right extremist. They are much older, with around 2/3 being over 35 years old, much less likely to be unemployed, and a full 14% of the attendees charged were business owners, and 30% were white-collar workers. These are not the typical far-right extremist demographics. These are just Republican constituency demographics. All that to say that the mainstream Republican Party has not only swept the violent far-right under its wing, it is comfortable embodying it itself. Okay, how did this happen? What are the narratives that have made their way out of smaller far-right cells and into common right-wing discourse? There are some you're probably already expecting, like the belief the election was stolen. That is a big one, and around 60% of the Republican Party does hold that to be true. To be fair, Trump spent months, and at this point over a year, hitting them over the head with that one, so it might not be the best example of a small group's narrative making it big. A more concrete example of that phenomenon is the QAnon conspiracy. 1 in 4 Republicans buy into the QAnon conspiracy theory that a group of Satan-worshipping, cannibalistic, blood-sucking pedophiles is ruling the US government. Plenty of people have looked into the movement's anti-Semitic tropes and its close proximity to neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups, so I won't spend more time on it here. But there's that. 25%. The more unexpected narrative making waves and bringing back that classic fascist flavor to the Republican Party is the Great Replacement theory. By the way, this is probably a good time to mention this video definitely isn't making it through the algorithm, so if you feel inclined, my Patreon is in the description. Anyway, the Great Replacement theory is a classic among neo-fascists, and it's pretty clear why. Put to paper in 2012 by French writer Renaud Camus, nope, wrong Camus, this is the guy. The Great Replacement asserts that there is a plot, which really means they think it's a Jewish thing, that the white race and white culture, whatever that is disappearing because of immigration from majority non-white countries. Fascists, and I really do mean fascists here, believe this will bring some general persecution of white people, because of course they can't imagine the world being run any differently than with one race subjugating another, while at the same time believing wholeheartedly that racism ended with Obama. In any case,
this is off topic, but did you hear about Etika Punks on Twitter? It's NFTs of Etika and a bridge.
Dude, please don't bring up shit like this. These people are doing it specifically so they can get this kind of coverage. Please stop. It's all like 4chan shit, dude. Please stop.
This is the theory that motivated the Christchurch shooter Brenton Tarrant and the El Paso shooter Patrick Cruz.
Jesus Christ.
And it's a big wet pile of fascist garbage that has, unsurprisingly, historical trajectory going straight from World War II through the American Nazi Party, Europe's own fascist politicians, and has now found a home among a substantial chunk of the Republican electorate. Here's a clip of Tucker Carlson endorsing the theory on Fox, calling it by name and likening it to eugenics.
Leftist, by the way. Hey, guys. Tucker Carlson is a leftist, by the way. Remember, anyone who fucking considers Tucker Carlson to be a leftist is a fucking absolute delusional person, okay? You're delusional. You're fucking dangerous. You're psychotic. I don't know what else to tell you. Shut the fuck up. This person is not a leftist, okay?
An unrelenting stream of immigration. But why? Well, Joe Biden just said it. To change the racial mix of the country. That's the reason. To reduce the political power of people whose ancestors lived here and dramatically increase the proportion of Americans newly arrived from the third world. And then Biden went further. He said that non-white DNA is the, quote, source of our strength. Imagine saying that. This is the...
Biden did say that? Yeah, I wonder in what context Biden was saying that. Biden was saying diversity is our strength. Why the fuck would you ever think that, like, there is such a concept, like a well-definable concept such as being white people, okay? There is such a concept as whiteness, and that we must do everything to preserve that whiteness. Don't you realize that that is exactly what fucking fascists say? That is straight up the 14 words, dog. That's what that is, okay? Considering diversity to be akin to genocide means you are just a white supremacist. But so many people, because of the United States of America's attitude towards whiteness, unironically don't realize that they are like at the precipice of believing Nazi shit. Okay? Just think for a brief moment, for once in your fucking life, what does whiteness mean? Is it just how pale your skin is? Or is it a concept that has, I don't know, been built around purity and exclusion? This is why I had such a long conversation about the Cracker saga, okay? This is why Crackergate extended to this degree when it did. Because so many people inadvertently, without recognizing, grew up in a white supremacist attitude, in a white supremacist society. So even if you are well-intentioned and don't recognize it, when you engage in like white identity politics, like saying I'm offended by the C word or whatever the fuck, okay, you are in the entry point into Nazi politics. Because the Nazi politics is literally that whiteness, which is not a definable trait beyond, like, you know, I guess the paleness of your skin, but whiteness is an arbitrary concept that is expanded throughout time, but ultimately is inherently exclusionary, okay, can only be saved by stopping black and brown people from having sex with white people consensually. You understand that, right? Why is that a bad thing? Why is it a bad thing where you know, black people and white people are having sex consensually and making, you know, brown babies, half black babies? Why is that a bad thing? Explain that to me. Because that's the only way you can defend the white race and defend the white demographic. Okay? And that, for the record, is precisely what white supremacists don't want. That's why they're anti-miscegenation.
The language of eugenics. It's horrifying. But there's a reason Biden said it. In political terms, this policy is called the Great Replacement, the replacement of legacy Americans with more obedient people from faraway countries. They brag about it all the time, but if you dare to say it's happening, they will scream at you with maximum hysteria.
That is America's most watched conservative casually parroting an openly white supremacist theory on primetime TV. But what does this have to do with January 6th? According to UChicago professor Robert Papp, between 4 and 8%, or around 21 million Americans at the high end, believe both 1, that the election was stolen, and that 2, Trump should be reinstated by force. Of that group, 63% believe in the Great Replacement theory, almost 10% more than believe in QAnon, whose flag...
My favorite take is legacy Americans. Wait, hold on, I gotta run this back because I didn't even fucking pay attention. Because I was still thinking in my mind of the concept of legacy Americans. Because Tucker can't say Native Americans because obviously that's someone else. So he had to find a way to say, like, white folk are like the true rulers of the lands that we live in. Okay? So instead of saying Native Americans, it says legacy Americans. That's awesome, dude. I mean, that hasn't had like, that didn't stick yet, but it's pretty funny when you think about it. Legacy Americans.
Professor Robert Papp, between 4 and 8%, or around 21 million Americans at the high end, believe both 1, that the election was stolen, and that 2, Trump should be reinstated by force. Of that group, 63% believe in the Great Replacement Theory, almost 10% more than believe in QAnon, whose flags we saw waved throughout the crowd on January 6th and at every...
And the real reason why so many people believe in the Great Replacement Theory, which is literally a white supremacist theory, the reason why so many people believe in that is because it's the most, like, it's the oldest fucking meme, dude. That's what it is. It's the oldest meme in the book. It's just like straight white supremacist garbage. Okay? And it makes, here's how it makes sense. Like, don't misunderstand what I'm about to say. Okay? If you grow up in a white enclave, okay, and you've never thought about race, or you've never thought about like American history in your mind, and you're automatically resorting to tribalism, okay, and you're like, well, I do want more people that look like me and sound like me, and you know, people that don't look like me are kind of scary. It's like flat earth theory. It's like very easy to infect people with this mentality, or to justify it, right? Because you're like, well, you know, it's kind of like family. I love my family and I want more people to be like my family. How is that bad? Black people get to do it. I mean, that's precisely, by the way, what Tucker Carlson says. How is it okay when black people get to say black pride, but when you say white pride, you're treated as a Nazi or a racist? So that is how you can infect someone into believing that, because they don't think about the consequences of that, or they don't even think about like what it means to be white. Dog, you're not white. Like you're you know, half English, half Scottish, okay? Like you're not white. You're just an American at this point. Because white pride has been tainted by white supremacists. Nobody attacks people for being proud of being Italian or Irish. First of all, white pride was not tainted by white supremacists. White pride was made by white supremacists. It came after black pride. It came after black power. White power, of course, because that's how reactionaries are. They don't come up with anything new on their own. They look to identitarian, they look to other identitarian movements that revolve around liberation for the oppressed people and marginalized people's struggles. And they say, we are the ones who are truly marginalized. But they're not. They are inherently, if you are white, if you consider yourself to be white, then you are inherently a part of the dominant group. That's what whiteness is. Whiteness is about power and exclusion from it. Okay?
Poggers.
That's what whiteness is. So you can't be considered white and also considered marginalized. Okay? Because whiteness historically and in contemporary society means you are the one who holds the power, and you are excluding others who you do not consider to be white from having that power. Now, that doesn't mean that like white people are not marginalized. Of course they are. Of course. But they're not marginalized on the basis of their whiteness. They're marginalized on the basis of their class. They're marginalized because they're poor. They're marginalized because they've been owned. They're marginalized because they're LGBT. They're marginalized because they're women. Okay? They might even be marginalized because of what their religious beliefs are. But they're not marginalized in that same way that other people are for the immutable characteristics. Okay? And this really breaks a lot of people's brains because, like, you've been taught this your entire fucking life. You aren't white. You're Irish American, Italian American, Greek American, Polish American, Jewish, from all different parts of the planet. You're just not white. You could understand. You could be like, yeah, I'm white in the sense that like I say I'm white, right? But like there is no definable trait, characteristic, ethnic background to that. Okay, it's just a concept that was created to define a group of individuals that do have the power. And the people that don't consider themselves to be like Irish, but instead to consider themselves to be white, and they're doing it deliberately because they're white supremacists, those people on that, like on the virtue of being white, consider themselves to be marginalized specifically so they can get you on board with the cause. The cause being white supremacy.
Every Trump rally for over...
Irish weren't considered white, lol? Yeah, no shit. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about Irish people now. Yes, the groups that I just mentioned were oppressed at a certain point for being from Ireland or from Italy as immigrants. But when they were oppressed, they were not considered white. But now they are, which is exactly what I'm saying. That's the fucking point. It would be laughable to say that an Irish person is not considered white in this day, right now, right? Same with Italian people. I mean, we joke about Italianophobia, or whatever the fuck, right? You think Jews are white now? It depends on what circle you go to, but yes. If you're around people that don't consider Jews to be white, then you're around some really fucking racist people, okay? That's it. Like, the people that don't consider Jewish people to be white are usually people that you do not want to be around. Hayır lütfen. Ve de ne olur tavuğumu yapar mısın? Ben teşekkür ederim. Ne olur başka yemek yap. Peki baba. Of course, there are, non-white Jews as well. Don't get me wrong. There's like Ethiopian Jews. There's like, I mean, there's a lot of different types of Jews, but you know what I mean when I say. There's Arab Jews. But we're talking about, like Polish Jews and shit. Anyway, let's keep going. Weird thing to say, you can't tell, but you can tell you love your family by the way you look and speak to them. Much love. Oh.
For a year. Let me say that again. More people in that crowd hold a deeply fascist belief than believe in the other slightly more wacky letter of the alphabet-based fascist belief. And we know that the Q crowd was a big part of the Trump fan base to start off with because they're just so open about it. The Great Replacement crowd is just not waving as many flags. It is 18 more letters than a big Q, though. Anyway, more than just getting some demographic information, Pap was able to estimate that, among all other motivations, a belief in the Great Replacement was the most significant trigger that turned people already convinced that the election was stolen into people who believed that they should engage in insurrectionist violence to reinstate Trump. In other words, the belief that white people are being replaced is the motivator that justified the riots for its perpetrators. And
by the way, this is the most you'll ever see like a fucking ML, which Second Thought is, talk about racism in this way. And this is definitely important to address because white supremacy is the primary motivator. Okay? It is the primary fucking motivator for a lot of these people. It is such a deeply embedded core ideology for so many Americans as a consequence of their fucking social development that they don't even recognize that they're engaging in a white supremacist attitude. Okay? Second Thought is not an anarchist. I think I'm pretty sure he's a Marxist-Leninist. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
And with these narratives making their way to the most watched conservative TV show and to regular conservative conferences since January 6th.
He's one of the few non-anarchist bread tubers, bro.
We might be in for an even worse time going forward. But the QAnon and Great Replacement stuff isn't the whole picture. In the last year, opposition to vaccine and mask mandates have functioned in much the same way, rallying together the various strands of the American far right to the somewhat more moderate Republican base, and infusing a more authoritarian tone into their discourse. The idea that the whole pandemic is some sort of hoax, just like they believe the election to be, has invited fascist extremists into what we recently called the mainstream currents of republicanism, who brought with them their horrifying views of what politics should be. Fascists, and more generally awful far-right extremists, are welcomed into the Republican fold. But in making this video, I want to be careful that it doesn't seem like this is something new. It's certainly very bad, much more explicit today than it has been in years, and tainted with a much more military and violent shade than before. But fascism in this country has existed in some way for decades, if not centuries. The conservative wing of the American political establishment, often joined in its mission by the more progressive wing with only a few years of delay, has found in its electorate enough political will to push forward nationalism, xenophobia, racism, and the glorification of white religious culture, at the very least since the Reagan era. And this country as a whole has engaged in genocidal racial violence for the majority of its history. It has always embraced more authoritarian, less democratic rule. It has always glorified its hegemonic role in the international sphere. It has always, in part or in whole, condoned its national project against racial and religious minorities.
That's why I always say it's very easy to get caught up in like a lot of racist attitudes, a lot of white supremacist attitudes, especially if you're white yourself, depending on your upbringing, because it is literally a part of your core identity and everything you fucking learn. It's as normative as having transphobic opinions because of your understanding of the rigid fucking binary that is gender, even though it's not true. And Republicans do a very good job of like dunking on people. Even neoliberals who are attacking me, for example, from a totally cynical point of view, just to get one off me, okay? Just to, force me to catch a fucking ban. They can do that because it's a talking point that everyone has fucking thought about and has fucking advocated for on one side or the other a million times over. Do you understand? And it doesn't help that, the other side's like antidote to that is like liberal bullshit or saying unlearn whiteness, okay? That can so easily be misconstrued and bastardized. Because the unfortunate reality is that like all of this stuff, I don't get how on the one hand you say identifying a group as whites is Nazi, but then you go on and criticize this group called white that doesn't exist according to you. Dude, I'm white, okay? I'm white. I say I'm white all the time. If you can't comprehend what I'm talking about, which I don't even think you're being, honest here. I think you're just like trying to fucking, trying to fucking debate or some shit. But you're just completely misunderstanding the point that I'm making here.
19-month brain rot, let's go.
Anyway, you are contradicting yourself though. So whiteness is a thing. Whiteness is a thing in the sense that it's like, it's not real. It's just like I have pale skin, I'm white. Okay. Whiteness as a concept of power, unfortunately, or in the way that like white supremacists use it, or in the way that racist people use it, is a real thing when it becomes a political tool or a motivator. Okay. One is just the way you look, okay, and your color. The other is a political construct that is well defined that constantly fucking expands despite being arbitrary. I defined it to you already. Whiteness as a social and political construct is a construct that is built upon exclusion and power. Those who hold power and those who exclude others from being white. But when I say I'm fucking white, I'm like, I'm white as like I'm pale. Okay? That's, by the way, that's the reason why, like, in most instances, like when asked about what it means to be white to white people, they usually often relegate to what they are not. Okay? Because whiteness can be defined only by what it isn't, other than what it has, which is power. But people are not going to define themselves like that. It is a hard thing to... No, why is this so hard to understand? It's kind of hard to comprehend. It is hard to understand if you are white and have... you know, if you yourself are white and you've never understood this, like, education. You've never been around people that are not white, or... You know, you've never been around people that are not white in positions of power or as equals, as peers. And it's not your fault. Like, you just fucking grew up in, you know, where Carter grew up in Idaho, in that part of Idaho that's like 97% white, where the Klan was operating out of. You know what I mean? Like, how the fuck is it your fault? You were born there. You don't know any better. Okay? Yeah, if you were in Fredericksburg, Idaho, then yeah, you're like, you never thought about that. The best way to describe it to gamers is default character. White men are the default character of society. It's just like anything that deviates away from that, you're like, wait, this is weird. That's different. That's new. Anyway. For the record, that's why, like, when I on the census, I'm white. But according to Tucker Carlson, I'm not white because I'm Turkish, I'm Muslim. So all of a sudden, I'm not white. Do you see what I'm saying? How could you ever do that? You know who you can't do that for? Black people. That's who you can't do that for. Unless you're Joe Biden and you say stuff like, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black, Jack. Anyway. Keep going.
And against every political movement to its left. The Capitol riots, Charlottesville a couple years ago. Moments like these were significant. They were marks of the change in fascism's presentation. But by no means were they catalysts of fascism or flukes we can easily ignore. Because even if we understand the kinds of narratives that bring fascist ideology into a more prominent role today, those narratives are still just the last step before mainstream acceptance. Their emergence in far-right cells and compatibility with the greater conservative currents had to come from somewhere, and they did. Today, fascism has been driven to its current apex not by those narratives alone, but by the failures of the neoliberal era. Failures that have been building for...
Yep, 100% in agreement with Second Thought on this. I mean, this is basically... He made a 17-minute video that perfectly captures every single thing I talked about yesterday, which is that, like, this is happening because Republicans are always going to want to win, okay? They're going to fucking do this nonstop. So you have to actually fight them, okay? You have to actually fight the Republicans at the policy level. So you have to make them fucking actually advocate for their actual positions and not be able to focus on the culture war stuff that is divisive, okay? Or divisive, sorry. But liberals don't want to do that because neoliberals, when it comes to the material realities, neoliberals, when it comes to economic policy, both on the Ronald Reagan side, but also on the Bill Clinton onwards Democratic Party side, are personally aligned with Republicans on all the fucking issues. So they're not actually creating an area where like there is like legitimate contradiction. There's like legitimate fucking differences in policy choices and differences in agreement.
Decades, and that have laid a fertile ground for fascism to take root. The economic insecurity that has fallen on more and more shoulders, the general decline of unionized labor, the disappearance of jobs that entire cities were built on, and the increasing pace of economic crises have resulted in a particularly unstable system that fewer and fewer people have faith in. That has opened up the space for opportunistic figures all too happy to make sure the capitalist economy endures, even if it means a descent into authoritarian ultranationalism. Figures who have tried to portray moments like the Trump presidency as a departure from what brought us here in the first place, when it was really just a natural next step for a fragile, crisis-ridden capitalist economy. That's so dumb. That makes no sense. How could that be? That's you. That's what you're saying right now. I can hear you. I can see you. I know you're confused. If only you had an ongoing 12-part series on fascism and its modern forms to help you understand it better.
Oh my God. That's a good ass fucking transition, dude. I need to learn from this